It's legal to travel domestically with any amount of cash. It's even legal to travel in and out of the US with more than $10,000 if you declare it. But that doesn't stop law enforcement from searching travelers' property and seizing any cash they find without warrants or evidence of a crime. I'm Kim Norberg of the nonprofit civil liberties law firm, the Institute for Justice, joined by co-host Keith Neely. We're talking today with IJ attorneys Jaba Tsitsuashvili and Ben Field about how the government treats carrying cash like a crime and what IJ's doing to fight back. This is Beyond the Brief. So Jaba, sometimes people who aren't as familiar with some of these issues as our listeners think that there's something inherently suspicious about traveling with cash, or like a large amount of cash. So can you kind of give us a highlight of some of IJ's clients that have traveled with cash?
Sure. So I think right off the bat, it's just worth noting that there's, as far as the law is concerned, there's nothing suspicious about traveling with cash because it's legal, and the police aren't entitled to stop you as a result of that. I think we can start with the story of one of our clients, Rebecca Brown. She was visiting her father, who was an elderly man who had kept tens of thousands of dollars of his life savings kind of stashed around his house. He came of age in an era where he kind of became distrustful of banks, so he stored all his cash there. At a certain point, Rebecca and Terry, who was her father, decided, we should get this stuff out of the house and put it in a bank so that kind of Rebecca could help use it to manage his expenses. So Rebecca was visiting Terry, took all that cash from Terry's place and was flying back home to take it to the bank. And as she was going through TSA, she was interrogated about the mere fact that she was traveling with cash, which again is totally legal. If you're traveling domestically like Rebecca was, there is not even any sort of reporting requirement, which some people may have heard of when it comes to traveling internationally with over $10,000, for example. But anyway, TSA sees that she's on a domestic flight, and she sees that she has this large amount of money. They don't know how much it is. They don't know why she's traveling with it. They keep her there. They bring state troopers over who continue to interrogate her. Finally, she's allowed to leave and go to her gate. But at that point, she's approached by DEA agents. Now she's dealing with federal officers in the airport. Long story short, they wake her father up, they wake Terry up, they call him, they make them both kind of explain the situation. Again, even though there is no justification for forcing them to kind of tell them why they're traveling with this legal currency, and they take it anyway. They get this explanation. Now, to be clear, Rebecca is free to leave, right? They're not interested in actually pursuing any sort of criminal charges because at the end of the day, they really know they don't have any basis for that. So Rebecca can go, but what the feds are really interested in, what the DA really wants, is the cash. They keep that, and that starts a whole kind of convoluted process where they have to kind of prove their own innocence to the DEA in order to get Terry's life savings back. And that's really emblematic of a lot of IJ's clients.
Ben, you don't need a justification to carry cash, whether you're flying with it or driving with it. But so often the government steps in and says, well, we're going to suspect you of a crime if you're carrying lots of cash. What's the government's justification in cases like Rebecca's and elsewhere where the government's trying to come in and seize cash just because people happen to be traveling with it?
Yeah, so I think that they appeal to an intuition that, it's a little unusual for people to travel with large amounts of cash, and so it can seem suspicious, and they tap into that intuition, even though it's completely legal. But in reality, the motivation is just that it is cash. And so of all of the things that you can forfeit, cash is the easiest one. You don't have to sell it like a car or a house or anything like that. It just can go straight into the police budget. And so it makes sense that they're focused on it, but it sort of shows the perversity of the system because they're so focused on cash, not because seizing cash stops crime, but because it's the easiest thing for them to get and to seize and to plow into a police budget.
We have another case about a traveler who's traveling by car, not by airports, but it sounds, somewhat eerily similar to the case that Jaba just described, right?
Yeah. So one of my clients is Stephen Lara. He, at the time, was living in Texas, but his daughters lived in California. And so he would regularly drive across the country to visit them. And he was doing that on this one trip. And he was pulling on the interstate into Reno, Nevada, about to cross the California border when he was pulled over. And it was this, the Nevada Highway Patrol officer pulls him over, says, you were driving great. Love to see you staying under the speed limit. But I just noticed that you passed a tanker truck a little closely. So this is part of just a general education program to let drivers know. And you think he's about to go on his way, but then the trooper starts asking a series of invasive questions, including, are you carrying a large amount of money? And Stephen, like some of our other clients, doesn't trust banks, or at the time didn't trust banks. So he was carrying his life savings. He kept his life savings in cash, and he was staying with his parents at the time, and they had some break-ins, so he thought it would be safer for the cash to be with him while he was traveling. So he honestly tells the officer, yes, I've got my life savings in cash. And then
Can I stop you there actually for a second? So, we know that this story ends badly in part because he admits to having this cash, but you can't lie to the police either and say that you don't have any cash. What are you supposed to do if you're traveling with cash, you get pulled over, what happens?
I mean, you can always you can decline to answer questions. The police don't have a right to interrogate you on the side of the road and ask a bunch of invasive questions. But Stephen didn't think that he had anything to hide. And the officer asked for permission to search his car, and he said, sure. Because again, the only thing, he had his life savings, and he had, Christmas presents for his daughters. And he thought, surely this is just, he's going to look, that'll be the end of it, and then I can be on my way. But the moment the officer realizes there's a bunch of cash, he calls the DEA, he calls his supervisor, and the complexion of it has completely changed to now trying to find justification and a reason to seize the money. And so ultimately, and we have this on body camera footage, his sergeant shows up. They are, talking with each other at Stephen's car. Stephen has receipts for all of the money and where it came from and that it's legal. And the officer who pulled him over even is saying to his sergeant, as odd as it is, it seems like everything lines up, and he's going to let Stephen go. But the sergeant is not interested in that and orders a forfeiture. And they bring in a drug dog to create justification for it. And ultimately, they seize about $86,000 in cash from Stephen, never charge him with a crime. And even worse, they circumvent Nevada law by using a workaround called equitable sharing, where state agencies give money to the federal government, which has fewer procedural protections for property owners than most state law, and then the feds forfeit it and kick back 80% or up to 80% to the state agency. But the state agency can then just use in its budget as it wants to.
But we've talked about this on a previous episode with Josh Wyndham, specifically about drug dogs and how the Supreme Court puts a lot of confidence in a drug dog hit, but there's not a lot of empirical evidence to back that up. How are drug dogs involved in the civil forfeiture process?
So they're used a lot. So they are, the dogs themselves are obviously completely innocent. They're just doing what they're trained to do. I definitely don't want to impugn the dogs, but they're essentially probable cause machines. So that an officer can always generate probable cause. And Stephen's case is a good example of that. They actually had two different dogs at the scene. The first one they used to try to just generally get a sense of something suspicious here. So the dog's walking around the car. The officer points to specific places on the car. The dog jumps up exactly where the officer pointed at them, and the officer says, oh, well, that's evidence that there's something suspicious here. And then
even an untrained dog would jump at a thing that you point at.
I have a rescue dog, right? He would jump on a car if I pointed.
Right. And then to when they actually are trying to justify seizing the cash, so they're on, I don't know if you've been outside of Reno, but it is essentially just desert. So there's nothing on the side of the highway here. But the sergeant takes the bundle of cash, puts it on the ground, nothing else there, They send it, it's like 20 feet in front of the car, and surprisingly, the dog sees it. And they say, oh, well, the dog has alerted, and therefore, it's contaminated with drugs, and therefore we can seize it. And so even if you set aside all of the problems and the sort of the obvious fact that these are just generating probable cause, and that, it's very easy to come up with a false positive in those situations. I mean, the vast majority of cash is contaminated with some amount of drugs. And so even if it were true that these dogs were reliable and that they weren't being used in a way that isn't particularly reliable, they can alert and it's still completely innocent. If you have cash in your wallet right now, even though you had no connection to drugs, that cash probably has residue of drugs on it.
Jaba, I think both you and Ben have referenced this a couple of times today so far, but one of the other problems with forfeiture is that it kind of flips the burden of proof on its head. Typically, when you think someone's suspected of illegal activity like narcotics, they're innocent until proven guilty. That's traditionally, obviously, in a case brought in the criminal system. Civil forfeiture, it sounds like they seize the money and then put the burden on the property owner to prove that the property that they had, in this case cash, was obtained in a legal way. How does that impact the validity or the constitutionality of these sorts of forfeiture practices?
Yeah, I mean, it makes them all the more burdensome, all the more, frankly, unconstitutional, too. And I think it might help. So we're talking here about the federal system, just to kind of focus it there. Some states differ a little bit, but it might help to kind of take the story of one of IJ's former clients, Kermit Warren. Kermit, similar to Rebecca, was traveling with a large amount of cash through an airport. It got flagged by TSA agents who alerted DEA. DEA took his money. This was also like Terry's. This was Kermit's life savings. He was traveling with his son. They were thinking about buying a new truck for their small scrapping business, hall scrapping business that they were trying to start. So the DEA takes the money at the airport. Again, obviously, they let Kermit and his son go because they can't actually pin any sort of crime on them. And so what happens then is you get a notice in the mail that says basically, we're starting the legal process to we've seized your money. Now we're starting the process to forfeit it, which is the legal term for actually forever keeping it, right? And at that point, what you get is called a CAFRA notice. And that notice, almost every single time that I've ever seen one, right. And I think this is really emblematic of the way they're done, it does not actually allege any particular crime that you're suspected of. It doesn't tell you what statutory kind of provision you violated. It just lists a bunch of, like the whole U.S. code, in essence. Like it just takes the whole U.S. drug code almost and says, yeah, you're suspected of violating this, and now come prove to us that you're innocent. And I'm not kidding. It's basically like a come prove to us why your money should not be kept by the DEA. And that's what Kermit was forced to do. We represented him. We presented kind of the evidence of how he came about being in the airport with this amount of cash, what it was for, where it came from. But you shouldn't have to do that. You shouldn't have to affirmatively come forward and say and justify why you have this completely legal currency to travel with, especially when on the flip side of that, the DEA is not actually telling you any basis for suspecting you of any crime or even any wrongdoing, right? So it's this completely backwards process. This completely flips the notion of justice and due process on its head. And I think it might actually be worthwhile I brought props. I don't know how well this is going to transfer,
visual
but
aids.
This is like a visualization that IJ has made of the process to try to get your money back if it's seized under this CAFR process. You can't see every,
I see a lot of caution
here, but
triangles.
I'm sure
That's
we'll
not a
post
good
an
sign.
image to this on the video as well as a link where
It's
you
long.
can check it out. But yeah, it is very long.
Yeah, so I think the long story short is it's this process where you are forced to prove your innocence, which completely just perverts the notion of due
and not
process.
just forced to prove your innocence, but forced to prove your innocence of an unspecified crime that could be one of hundreds, if not thousands, of various offenses located in the federal code.
Exactly.
So, you have this crazy chart of where on this chart are like Rebecca and Terry, for example.
I mean, at this point, luckily, Rebecca and Terry are out of this chart. They've both gotten their money back, with IJ's help. But most people aren't that lucky, right? Most people can't. First of all, most people can't hire a private lawyer because it's too expensive. Oftentimes, the amount that's taken will exceed the amount that a lawyer would charge you to represent them. And there's just simply not enough legal representation to do this kind of work. And the DEA and DOJ know that, and they take advantage of that. So they know that a lot of people will simply just give up. A lot of people will simply just it's almost extortionate. They'll say, well, we'll give you half of it back if you don't fight it. And most people, they'll say, okay, fine. It's just not. I don't have the means to fight this. I need this money for some sort of emergency, maybe, or my business. So they know that they can take advantage of the fact that people don't have IJ's backing or even any legal backing behind them.
Did you know IJ represents ordinary people, free of charge, as they fight back against government abuse? If you're looking for a rewarding way to support our work, consider becoming a member of our merry band of monthly donors and stand shoulder to shoulder with IJ's clients every month of the year. For a limited time, when you sign up to donate $22 a month by October 15th, you'll receive our exclusive IJ 2025 calendar. This special calendar features inspiring stories and images of the courageous people we represent. Monthly donations are convenient and cost-efficient, meaning more of your money goes directly to our fight for freedom and justice. Sign up to donate today at ij.org/calendar.
Ben, Jaba just alluded to the fact that our clients frequently get their money back not too long after they file suit. Is this just a case of the government kind of getting a little embarrassed once their conduct is made public, or is this part of a strategy that government lawyers are using to try to avoid judicial review in these cases? Because oftentimes when governments give the property back, the first argument they try to make is that the case is now moot.
So I think it speaks to both of those things. So I think, first of all, it speaks to what is actually going on here. That usually when you show up with a lawyer and show that you're going to fight, they do give the money back, which just proves that they really never had anything on these people to begin with. So Stephen, for instance, we filed a lawsuit, on one night. A Washington Post reporter who was covering it called the Department of Justice that night. And the first thing the next morning, we all have an email in our inboxes saying, we want to return the money, which just shows that they never had any evidence that Stephen had committed a crime. And the fact that that happens over and over again shows that in reality, as I was saying, they grab the money and it's just, we'll see if it sticks, see if they actually bother to fight it. So I think it shows that for the most part, this isn't actually about crime prevention. They don't really have evidence that people are committing crimes. They just want to keep the money. But it is also then, once IJ shows up, it's a way to try to avoid accountability. And so, the way our legal system works, you can only litigate issues if you've got some ongoing stake in it. And so if you don't, if the money's been returned to you, the government will then try to get rid of the case so that there isn't this, broader legal principle being established that they can't do this in the future, which requires IJ to be creative in making sure that we not only get our clients' property back, but that our clients can then make a stand to stop this from happening to other people. And it's really hardening to hear our clients say, and really mean it, that what they care about most is stopping it from happening to other people. So in Stephen's case, we are continuing a lawsuit. We filed a federal lawsuit to get the money back. They gave that back, so that's over. But we are also pursuing a lawsuit against the Nevada Highway Patrol to stop them from doing this to other people. And the way we are accomplishing that is by using this special cause of action under the Nevada Constitution that allows us to seek damages for violating the Nevada Constitution, which is a way for us to build precedent that can help other people. In other cases, including our litigation against the TSA, we have class action lawsuits, which allow us to represent everybody in the country who's being affected by this, so that the government can't just give money back to one person and make it go away.
So the TSA case is a class action, which makes it sound like this must be a pretty big problem of government taking cash in airports and things like that. How big of a problem is that?
It's huge. IJ recently put out a report titled Jetway Robbery, which focuses on a different federal agency, the CBP, and how much how much cash they're forfeiting and seizing from travelers at airports. And I think the stats here say, it says from the year 2000 to 2016, CBP and other DHS agencies took money from at least 30,574 travelers at airports, and that raked in over $2 billion for DHS. So this is a massive problem. Our class action lawsuit against the TSA and the DEA is aimed at a sliver of it, right? Because even that does not account for the agencies that I just named, which are doing the same thing to travelers all across the country. So it's affecting people every day.
And it's not just happening in the context of passenger travel, right? I mean, because as I understand it too, there's a lot of government focus on interstate shipping. And we've recently launched a case, FedEx forfeiture in Indiana. Can one of you talk a little bit about how this plays into our civil forfeiture work?
Sure. So, we're representing clients who deal in the jewelry business, which often involves transporting cash in exchange for jewelry across the country. And they got caught up in something that they didn't know, that there was this bigger process going on, which is that Indiana has this system where there's a large FedEx facility there, and so they will go in, try to find money in packages and seize it and forfeit it under Indiana law, even though the only reason that the packages are there are the happenstance of how FedEx decided to ship them. And so they are trying to seize this property from people, even though you've got someone from California and someone from Virginia who have no connection to Indiana, aren't alleged to have committed any crime at all, but certainly no crime connected to Indiana. And yet Indiana is seizing huge amounts of money, not just our clients, but they're emblematic of many, many more people. And so we are representing both them and bringing a class action against Indiana to stop this from happening to all of the people whose property is being seized with no connection to Indiana or allegations of Indiana crimes, to make the basic point that, when you engage in interstate commerce, FedEx, just because FedEx happens to be sending it through Indiana, doesn't give Indiana the opportunity to ruffle through your packages and start seizing your property.
So many of our listeners have probably seen the IJ's YouTube video with the DEA agent who, stops a guy, searches his bag without any consent. It's like a cell phone video. It's crazy, actually. And there's, dogs searching around his thing and everything. Is this what's happening to the packages or to, Rebecca and stuff? Is that how it's going for them?
Essentially, yeah. If you watch that video, you say, I think the DA officer says, I wrote it down because it says,
I don't consent to being searched.
I don't care what your consent stuff. I don't really care about your phone report.
The traveler is saying over and over to him, I don't consent to my property being searched. I don't consent to my bag being searched. I don't consent. I don't consent. And he says, I don't care about that. And then he is also asking him, am I suspected of a crime? And he says, I don't know. So again, if you don't have any basis to hold my stuff, to bring a dog, the dog is not supposed to be there so that you can just kind of willy-nilly kind of grab random people's stuff and then hope against hope that you're going to find something. The point of the search is supposed to be that you already have some basis to suspect that something is going on here. So they're really just going on these kind of fishing expeditions. And then if you watch the video again, there's an aspect there where you kind of see this goes back to the dog is just a probable cause machine that kind of the officer kind of makes a sound and gestures with his hand, and that's when the dog alerts. So there's a whole kind of the dog aspect of this is repeating over and over, as you can see in various kinds of situations. So it is emblematic of what happens at airports. DEA chooses people based on the fact that maybe TSA has alerted them they have a lot of cash, or maybe because TSA or someone has alerted them that this person is on a quick turnaround, traveling, bought their ticket recently, which I don't know, maybe you're going to a funeral, right? That's not a basis for DEA to come talk to you in an airport, but that's all they have. And in that case, they didn't even find any cash. So again, like I said, the dog alerted, no cash turned up. Obviously, nothing illegal turned up. So these really are just fishing expeditions. And again, he was being told, like Rebecca, like all of our other clients, you can go, but we're keeping your bag. So again, this really is not about ferreting out any sort of crime. What this is about, is really just hoping that they're going to find cash. And oftentimes, they do because they've been tipped off by TSA, but that doesn't mean that you've done anything unlawful.
So what's going on in the class action suit against the TSA and DEA? Like, what are we arguing? Where is that case now?
Yeah, a couple of things. With respect to the TSA, we have two arguments, broadly speaking, against them. One is that they are exceeding the scope of their lawful, statutory authority, because they're supposed to be there to make sure that for airline safety, for travel safety, right? They're not supposed to be there to interrogate you about why. Even let's assume that there may be some basis to interrogate a person who happens to be traveling with a lot of cash. That has nothing to do with airline safety. That might be, like I said before, drug crimes, for example, right? So that's one aspect of the case against TSA. The other is a Fourth Amendment claim under the Constitution, which says that by holding people at TSA and interrogating them about the cash that they're traveling with, they are violating the Fourth Amendment because there's no basis. Again, the mere fact that you're traveling with cash is not suspicious, is not probable cause, is not reasonable suspicion under the Fourth Amendment standards. And then the DEA aspect of the case has to do with, again, the DEA is approaching people in what we all know is these kind of high security area of an airport, right? Anywhere you're in an airport, you assume that you're kind of always subject to some sort of search by some sort of government agent, and they're really kind of taking advantage of that and approaching people that they've been tipped off to by TSA have a lot of cash, and doing to them what they did to Rebecca, what they did to Kermit, interrogating them, not really ever giving, probable cause does not tend to build when you have those interrogations, because all people are doing is explaining to you the lawful reasons that they're traveling. And yet at the end of that conversation, where probable cause has really dissipated rather than sprung into action, they take the cash anyway. And so that case has been going for a couple of years now. It's in the discovery phase, which is basically the fact gathering case, phase of the case, where we're exchanging documents and trying to get as much transparency about this process from these agencies as possible.
So, where's Stephen's case now? That's kind of already had sort of an unusual victory, right? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so I mentioned that, we're suing under this special system that Nevada has to allow you to sue for damages for constitutional violations. But that actually was a result of this case. So we filed our suit, and then the government moved to stay the suit indefinitely. So Stephen had already lost his money for 7 months while he was waiting for the feds to return it, and they blew through their own statutory deadlines. And the government says, no, you need to we're going to put this case on hold indefinitely. Because there's another completely unrelated case at the Nevada Supreme Court that asks the question whether you're allowed to sue directly under the Nevada Constitution. And listeners to the show probably know that this is itself an area that we care a lot about, in having people be able to sue for violations of their constitutional rights. And so we got involved as an amicus in that case. I flew out to Carson City and participated in the argument. And the Nevada Supreme Court resolved that with just a smashing victory for a constitutional accountability in that state, saying there's just a strong default presumption that the government has to follow the Constitution, and that damages are an appropriate remedy when the government has violated your rights in the past, and things like injunctions aren't going to be able to remedy that looking forward. And so as a result of that, we're now using that cause of action to pursue Stephen's case in that. And actually, we're doing discovery in that and we're getting good information about what's going on in Nevada. But we are also just this fall, going to be arguing our primary claim to the court, which is similar to the TSA one, just that the law enforcement went way beyond their statutory authority here. In this case, by circumventing Nevada law to give Stevens money to the feds. They deprive Steven of many of the protections that Nevada law gives. And we're making a straightforward argument that the Nevada legislature didn't intend for law enforcement agents in that state to just ignore the Nevada Constitution and the protections that Nevada law gives to property owners there. And so that it was unlawful for them to hand the money over to the feds. And that's just pretty much a purely legal claim, doesn't require any facts. And that's been fully briefed, will be argued to the court this fall. And so we hope that we'll actually just have an early victory in the case before even going on to our constitutional claims.
So what's the long-term solution here? Like, it seems like the government has a whole lot of incentive to kind of keep this system going, and we have these cases kind of chipping away at that. But how do we, fix this as a big picture thing?
So, I mean, I think that I think that these cases that we've been talking about are part of it, where we're just trying to, put bricks in the wall to protect property owners. And so whether that's using state constitutions and state law to say, no, like Nevada and other states have more protections than the federal system, and so you can't circumvent the state law that gives more protections, or that TSA can't go outside of its statutory ambit and has to respect the Fourth Amendment in airports. Those are important, but as listeners may also know, courts are starting to think bigger about this. And a case this spring called Cully was sort of a short-term loss of, the Supreme Court in that case said you don't get a right to a prompt hearing right after a seizure. The only thing that you're entitled to is the actual forfeiture hearing. But 5 of the 9 justices said this entire system seems very, very bizarre. And the idea that, the government just gets to take your stuff on the allegation that you've committed a crime, but then not actually charge you with a crime and, potentially hold on to that money or your property or your car or whatever for a long, long period of time and force you to prove your innocence. I mean, that entire system seems wrong. And so the specific, that was sort of the battle was lost for the anti-forfeiture bar in that case. But I think it opened up the possibility that the long-term war in defense of property rights may very well be won. And I think that these individual cases prove how abusive the process is, and that we just need to get rid of civil forfeiture altogether and actually make the government prove that you committed a crime in order to take your property.
Thanks for watching today's episode. Our last episode discussed bogus traffic stops and how Americans' vehicles have become Fourth Amendment free zones. Law enforcement plays an important role in our society, but they also need to be held accountable when they violate the Constitution. Let's take a look at some of your questions and comments. At DTC writes, imagine how much money the ATF, DEA, and FBI have obtained since the inception of this law and haven't disclosed it. Well, the answer may shock you, DTC. According to the 3rd edition of IJ's groundbreaking study, Policing for Profit, state and federal agencies forfeited over $60 billion from 2002 to 2018. That's billion with a capital B. To give you a sense of scale, $60 billion is roughly equivalent to the economy of oil-rich Alaska. In other words, state and federal agencies forfeited the Alaskan economy from Americans in less than 20 years' time. The worst part? That number probably underestimates how much money the government forfeited over that period because just 20 states had complete data that covered the time we studied. In 2018 alone, the year with the most complete set of data, 42 states and the federal government forfeited over $3 billion. Now, most of that money goes directly to law enforcement, including the same police and prosecutors who seize and forfeit the property. It's a corrupt system, which is why we at IJ are working so hard to put a stop to it. Robert Forrester writes, can an officer force anyone to sit in the passenger seat of a police car? Well, that's a great question, Robert. Like many Fourth Amendment questions, the answer is, it depends. If an officer has probable cause that you committed an arrestable offense, for example, then the officer can always arrest you and place you in his patrol vehicle. But if he has no reason to believe that you've done anything illegal, then he can ask you questions, but he can't hold you indefinitely or force you to go anywhere. The officer can, however, ask you to sit in the patrol car or consent to a search. In that situation, you're free to comply if you'd like, but you're also free to refuse. And if you aren't sure whether the officer is asking permission or making a demand, you're free to ask the officer to clarify. But know that once you consent to a search, the Fourth Amendment goes out the window. So always remember to consent carefully. JB Nomad writes, only a person should be charged, not an inanimate item such as cash. This is one of the quirkiest parts of forfeiture cases, JD. Often the government will bring what's called a suit in rem, or against the property itself. That's why forfeiture cases have some of the strangest case names, like in re $137,452 cash in a 1989 Ford Bronco, instead of the more typical State versus Smith. But I think these strange names helpfully reveal what civil forfeiture suits are actually about. They're not about holding someone responsible for committing a crime. They're not about sending someone to jail for harming another. They're about taking that person's property. Inquisitor writes, always have a dash cam running and record all interactions with your phone. That's right, Inquisitor. You have a First Amendment right to record the police in public, and exercising that right becomes important often when you least expect it. Better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it, as I always like to say. Pilot Andy writes, regarding the drug-sniffing dog, the Sixth Amendment guarantees the right to be confronted with the witnesses against him. In trial, can you have the dog take the stand and testify to what they smelled? This is, I have to say, such an interesting question, Pilot Andy. You're right that the Confrontation Clause entitles a criminal defendant to confront their accuser. In the case of drug-sniffing dogs, that usually means the dog's handler will come and testify about his history with the dog, the signals the dog gives, and so on. Not Air Bud meets my cousin Vinny, unfortunately. Ian Battles writes, do you have any cash? I don't discuss my finances with strangers, officer. That's the right answer, Ian. Bretta writes, as long as we fail to train our cops in civil rights, we can't even begin to correct this problem. And apparently, no amount of Supreme Court decisions or cops losing civil cases is going to do it. It's time that we stop allowing the police to decide how they're going to police us. We tell them how to do their jobs, not the other way around, and this has been backwards for way too long. I think you hit on a really important point, Bretta. As long as doctrines like qualified immunity protect government officials from civil liability when they violate people's civil rights, police departments and government agencies have no incentive to spend resources to better train their officers. That's why our project on immunity and accountability is so important. Better accountability leads to better behavior. Companies train their employees because the law holds them liable for their employees' conduct. Good government demands no less. Thanks again for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe, and tune in next time.